I never thought much about small-town life until something happened in Enfield, Illinois that changed my perspective on everything. It's not a place you would think of when you imagine strange occurrences or creepy happenings, but it only takes one event to change that. One event that makes you question everything you thought you knew about reality. I didn't believe in monsters, at least, not until I saw it. What I saw, I still can't explain. It was 1973 when the first strange thing happened. I was a young man back then, barely old enough to be considered an adult, but I remember it as if it were yesterday. It was a late evening when I first saw it. I had been out with a few friends, hanging around the outskirts of Enfield. Nothing special. I wasn't looking for adventure or anything out of the ordinary. Just a quiet night. I was walking home, cutting through the woods behind my house, my usual shortcut, when I heard something. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something in the underbrush, but as I kept walking, I felt watched. There was this heaviness in the air, like the whole world had gone still. I turned my head to the right, towards the tree line, and that's when I saw it, standing in the shadows. It was small, maybe 4 feet tall. I remember those red eyes. They were glowing. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen, and it didn't move like one either. It wasn't walking, it was hopping. Each movement it made was jerky, unnatural, and it made a horrible scraping sound as it moved. It looked like something out of a nightmare, but there I was, frozen in place, watching it. My heart started pounding. I couldn't look away, but at the same time I wanted to run. It didn't seem to care about me. It just stood there, staring back at me like it was studying me. And then, just like that, it was gone. It didn't run away, didn't make a sound. It just disappeared back into the darkness of the woods, leaving me standing there, confused, terrified, and unsure if I had imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. I tried to tell my family what I saw, but they thought I was just messing with them. No one believed me. After all, there was no proof. But then, things started happening around our house. My younger sister, Wendy, was the first to notice it. At night, she started hearing scratching sounds outside her window, metal scraping on metal. I thought she was just imagining things, but the next night I heard it too. It was faint at first, like someone was dragging something across the ground. The sound came from the woods. I tried to ignore it, but then it started to feel wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. One night, I decided to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way outside, hoping to find some logical explanation, maybe an animal, a stray cat, something. But when I shined the light into the woods, that's when I saw it again. The creature, standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. This time, it was closer. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the glowing eyes or the strange way it moved, it was the sense that this thing wasn't supposed to be here. It was wrong. I quickly ran inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart was racing, my head spinning, but I knew what I had seen. I knew it wasn't a figment of my imagination. I wasn't the only one. Word began to spread through the town. People started sharing their stories, strange noises at night, sightings of a small grey creature in the woods. It wasn't just happening to my family anymore. It was happening to others too. The townspeople began calling it the Enfield monster, but even the sheriff couldn't explain it. He sent a couple of officers to patrol the area, but they never found anything. Just empty woods, empty streets. Nothing to show that there was a creature lurking in the shadows. But the creature didn't stop. It wasn't just sightings anymore. It was getting closer. People started seeing it more frequently. Some even swore they heard it scratching at their windows, just like we had. I knew I wasn't crazy. My family wasn't crazy. We weren't imagining it. This thing was real. The last time I saw the Enfield monster, it wasn't just outside my window. No, it came right up to the house. I remember hearing that metallic scraping sound again, getting closer and closer. I peeked through the blinds, my heart pounding. And there it was, standing by the fence, looking directly at me. It was closer than I'd ever seen it before, so close that I could see its thin, sharp features clearly. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, locking onto mine. I didn't wait. I ran to my parents, tried to tell them, but by the time we all got outside, the creature was gone. We called the sheriff again, but as usual, there was nothing to be found. No tracks, no signs, just empty woods. To this day, I don't know what that thing was. I don't know why it came to Enfield, or why it seemed to target my family. What I do know is that the fear I felt that night, the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just outside my window, I'll never forget it. There's a part of me that wants to believe it was just my imagination. But deep down, I know better. I saw it. My family saw it. And I'm still haunted by the thought that it could be out there, watching, waiting, even now. If you ever find yourself walking through Enfield at night, be careful. You never know what might be lurking just out of sight. Imagine living in a place like Salem, Massachusetts, a town steeped in mystery and history, where whispers of old ghosts and dark tales float through the foggy streets. But none of the stories are as chilling as the haunting of Captain Joseph White, a legend that still lingers in the shadows of this historic town. Captain Joseph White was a respected merchant captain in Salem in the early 1800s. He was wealthy, well liked by the community, and had built a comfortable life after years of sailing the high seas. But the comfort of his life would be short-lived, as a deadly betrayal would turn his entire world upside down and ultimately lead to his spirit becoming one of Salem's most famous and restless ghosts. It was the year 1830 when Captain White's life came to a brutal and mysterious end. In the dead of night, he was murdered in his own home, and what followed was a case that would shake the town to its very core. It wasn't the kind of crime that could be easily swept under the rug. This was something darker, something more personal. The murder wasn't about revenge against a stranger. It was a crime born from greed, family betrayal, and a thirst for wealth. The plan, as twisted as it was, had been carefully thought out by two men, Richard Crowninshield and Benjamin White, the captain's own relative. Crowninshield, a known criminal with a troubled past, had convinced Benjamin White, a man who stood to gain a large inheritance from Captain White's death, to join him in the act. Together, they plotted to kill Captain White, knowing that his wealth would pass to the surviving members of his family. The night of the murder, Crowninshield and his accomplice snuck into Captain White's home. In a brutal act of violence, they killed the captain while he slept in his bed. But there was something strange about this murder. Unlike most robberies, the captain's wealth was not stolen. His money, his valuables, and his treasure were left untouched. The murder seemed senseless and brutal, yet almost too calculated, too cold. The next morning, the people of Salem were horrified to discover Captain Joseph White's lifeless body. But even more disturbing was the fact that there seemed to be no obvious motive. The killer hadn't taken the wealth, which made it all the more perplexing, but the true horror lay in the details. The crime wasn't just a theft gone wrong. It was a betrayal, a planned murder, executed by someone from within his own family. The case went to trial, but not before the dark rumors surrounding Captain White's murder began to take hold. And as the investigation unfolded, the legend of the ghost of Captain White began to take shape. For days after his murder, strange things began happening around Captain White's home. People reported hearing the sounds of footsteps inside the house when no one was there, the soft creaking of floorboards as though someone was still walking through the rooms. Those who dared to approach the residence spoke of a strange feeling of being watched, of an unsettling presence that seemed to linger in the air. Soon, the whispers turned into something more. Captain White's ghost became a figure of terror among the residents of Salem. The stories spread fast. Some said they had seen his ghostly figure standing at the window of his home, staring out into the street. Others claimed they felt a cold chill when they passed by the house, as if Captain White himself was standing just behind them, watching their every move. The sightings became more frequent, with some claiming they saw a pale, almost translucent figure on stormy nights, standing still in the windowsill, waiting. His face, contorted in anger and confusion, looked as though he was desperately searching for something he couldn't quite grasp. Was it vengeance? Was it the truth behind his betrayal? No one could say for sure. But one thing was clear. Captain White's spirit was not at rest. The curse of Captain White didn't just haunt his house, it spread throughout the town. People who had been involved in the investigation or had any connection to the case began to experience strange occurrences. Some began to suffer from terrible nightmares, where they would see the captain's ghost staring at them with piercing eyes, silently accusing them of something though. None could ever figure out what that something was. Others claimed they heard whispers in the dark, voices that would echo in their minds at night, reminding them of the old captain's tragic end. As the trial progressed, it was discovered that Richard Crowninshield was the mastermind behind the plot. His partner, Benjamin White, had been manipulated into taking part in the crime by his own greed and desperation. But despite all the evidence, it wasn't until after the trial that the strange occurrences surrounding Captain White's death seemed to come to an abrupt halt. Crowninshield was executed, and Benjamin White, though spared, was left with the consequences of his actions, his guilt following him like a shadow for the rest of his life. Some believe that the ghost of Captain Joseph White had finally been appeased with the justice that was served. But others said that the spirit was still out there, wandering the streets of Salem, waiting for more answers and searching for the one thing he had been denied: peace. The eerie stories of his ghost have persisted for generations. People who have walked through the streets of Salem late at night report feeling as if they are being followed by something unseen, something cold, something vengeful. In some versions of the tale, it's said that Captain White still guards his wealth, watching over the land he once owned, and punishing anyone who dares to step too close to his treasure. But no one knows for sure. Was Captain White's ghost ever laid to rest? Or does he still haunt the old streets of Salem, waiting for the betrayal that took his life to be fully understood? Is his restless spirit still seeking those responsible for his death, demanding they answer for their actions, even from beyond the grave? Some say you can still hear him at night, wandering the foggy streets, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the town. And if you listen closely enough, you might just hear his whisper, accusing, demanding that his name be remembered and his death avenged. It was late one summer night in New Mexico when I encountered the ghostly legend of La Llorona. I had heard the stories all my life, of course, growing up in a small, tight-knit town where everyone knew everyone else's business. The older generations spoke of La Llorona in hushed tones, like she was a real, tangible threat. They'd warn us not to wander near the riverbanks after dark, to stay close to home when the moon was full, and to never, under any circumstances, go near the water when you heard a woman crying. At the time, I thought they were just spooky stories, passed down from generation to generation to keep kids from staying out too late. But on that particular night, I learned just how wrong I was. It all started when I decided to take a walk along the Rio Grande River. I was 22, staying with my aunt and uncle while I was on summer break from college. I hadn't been to this small town for years, but the nostalgia of childhood summers made me want to take in the sights again, the dusty roads, the sagging adobe houses, and the serene yet haunting beauty of the river winding through the desert. It was the kind of place where you could hear the crickets in the distance and the occasional howl of a coyote. The town was peaceful, almost too peaceful, but there was something dark lurking in the silence. Something that, as I found out that night, I had never truly understood. It wasn't that I wanted to go near the river, but something about it called to me that night. The town was small, and there weren't many places to explore, especially at night. I had always been curious about the myths of La Llorona, the woman in white, the weeping ghost who was said to drown her children and now roams the riverbank searching for new victims to drag into the water. The stories told by the locals were chilling, but like many things, I dismissed them as superstition. That night, however, the air was thick and still. It was one of those evenings where the temperature dropped just enough to be comfortable, and I thought I'd take a short stroll along the river before heading back to my aunt's house. I was walking alone, the darkening sky above me only broken by the faint glow of the moon when I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, or maybe an animal rustling nearby, but then the sound came again, soft, weeping, almost like a woman sobbing in the distance. I stopped in my tracks. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't near anyone. I hadn't seen a single person since I left the house, and this was far from any neighborhood. There was no one out here. The crying was faint, but unmistakable. It didn't sound like an animal. It wasn't a coyote or a fox. It was too human, too mournful. I stood there for a moment, trying to rationalize it, telling myself it was just someone who had been drinking or a woman in distress. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. La Llorona. I had heard the stories. The one about the woman who drowned her children in the river because her husband had abandoned her, and how, in her grief and madness, she now wandered the banks of the river, crying for her lost children. Some said that if you heard her cry and followed it, you'd be the next victim, dragged into the waters where you would drown just like her children. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts out of my mind, but the cry grew louder. It wasn't coming from far away anymore. It was right by the water. I swallowed hard, my feet moving without thinking, drawn toward the sound, as though some invisible force was pulling me closer. As I reached the edge of the river, the sound stopped. Silence. I stood there for a moment, staring at the water, the moonlight casting shadows on the dark surface. For a second, I wondered if I had imagined it. I had just walked down this path, and I didn't see anyone or anything, but I could feel it now. Something was wrong. And then, from behind me, I heard a soft, low whisper. "Hi, Miss Hijos." The voice was clear now, and it chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just a cry anymore. It was a whisper, a voice full of pain, longing, and sorrow. The voice was so close I could almost feel it on the back of my neck. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but there was nothing. No one was there. The night was still, too still, and it seemed as if the world had held its breath. I could feel the sweat on my palms, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I slowly began to back away, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground. My instincts told me to leave, to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the river. I felt as though I was being watched, not by one set of eyes, but many unseen, hidden, waiting. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure clad in white, standing at the water's edge. She was barely visible at first, just a shadow, but then the moonlight revealed her more clearly. Her long, wet hair hung loose around her face, her body shrouded in a flowing, tattered white gown. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. She stood there, motionless, staring out at the water. I couldn't see her face, but I could feel the weight of her sorrow, her grief. It was palpable, a suffocating presence that seemed to reach out toward me. And then she turned. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through me, and her mouth was twisted in an eternal, silent scream, her lips stained with the grief of 1,000 lost souls. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed with fear as she began to take slow, deliberate steps toward me. Her feet didn't seem to touch the ground, and the air around her grew colder with every passing second. "Ay, mis hijos. ¿Dónde están mis hijos?" The words came again, filled with so much agony that I felt my heart tighten in my chest. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I turned and ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, my legs pumping desperately as I heard the faintest echo of footsteps behind me. The air grew colder, and the sobbing grew louder, like it was right at my heels, but I didn't dare look back. The only thing I could think of was getting back to the safety of my aunt's house, away from the river, away from whatever that thing was. I don't remember much about the next few minutes, just my feet pounding against the dirt, my breath ragged and desperate, and the deafening sound of my heartbeat. When I finally reached my aunt's house, I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it. My hands were shaking, my heart still racing, and all I could think about was the woman, La Llorona, standing by the river, still searching for her lost children. That night, I stayed awake, my mind racing with questions and fear. What had I seen? Was it real, or was it just the result of too many stories and too much imagination? But as I lay there in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that La Llorona had been real, that she had come for me, just as the story said she would. And I knew, deep down, that I had narrowly escaped the same fate as the many victims before me. The next morning, I woke up to a strange heaviness in the air, as if something had followed me back to the house. I didn't tell my aunt what had happened. She would have just laughed it off as a nightmare or some old myth, but I knew the truth. I had come dangerously close to becoming another story. A story like the ones whispered around campfires, passed down from generation to generation. A story of someone who had heard the cries of La Llorona and had lived to tell the tale. But just barely. And that's where our story ends for tonight. But remember, not all stories truly have an ending. Some stories linger in the shadows, waiting to be discovered, and the ones you think you've escaped might still be following you. If you enjoyed tonight's tale and want to hear more haunting legends, ghostly encounters, and eerie mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next, because the nightmares are far from over. And before you go, share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Have you ever encountered something you couldn't explain? Or do you have a ghost story of your own that might be featured in one of our upcoming videos? We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this story, give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone who dares to face the unknown. Thanks for joining us at Nightmare Stories. Stay safe, or better yet, stay terrified. I moved into what I believed was my forever home, a grand, historic house nestled along the quiet stretch of Brownsville Road, just outside Pittsburgh. It had everything: antique charm, towering oak trees, a wraparound porch with columns that felt like they belonged in a painting. I remember standing on that front lawn the day we moved in, watching my kids run through the grass while my wife admired the old brickwork. It felt like the American dream. But even on that first day, something felt strange. The air inside was dense, heavy in a way that didn't match the fresh fall breeze outside, and the silent sight wasn't peaceful. It was tense, like the house itself was holding its breath. At first, it was just small, dismissible things. Light bulbs bursting in rooms that hadn't been touched, cold spots that lingered even when the heat was blasting. Doors creaking open, despite being firmly shut. I chalked it up to the quirks of an old house. But things escalated quickly. One evening, as I was reading in the living room, I heard a sharp knock on the basement door. When I opened it, nothing. Just the dark, narrow stairs leading into the pitch-black basement. That night, I heard it again, and again the next night. Then came the sounds. At first, faint, like someone dragging a chair across the floor beneath us. But then they turned into whispers, moaning, crying, then screaming. It wasn't human, and it was always coming from the basement. My kids became restless. They stopped sleeping through the night, complaining of nightmares and hearing voices in the walls. My youngest began wetting the bed against something he hadn't done in years. My wife, once vibrant and talkative, became withdrawn. She stopped smiling. She barely spoke. One night, I woke to her crying silently in bed, her back turned to me. When I reached out, she winced. That's when I saw them 3 long, jagged scratches running down her back, as if something had clawed her in her sleep. We had no pets. A few nights later, I was standing in the hallway when I heard my name whispered from behind me. David. I turned. No one. But the voice, it was mine. It was my voice calling me from the basement. That's when I started documenting everything. I kept a log of every incident, no matter how small. I installed cameras, set up audio recorders. Most people, including my friends, thought I was losing it. But then a local priest visited. He walked into the house and within 5 minutes asked me if we had a crucifix. He said he could feel something clinging to the walls. Over the next 2 years, we had 3 exorcisms. I placed crucifixes in every room, lined every window with salt, sprayed holy water on every wall until the plaster began to discolor. And yet, it got worse. The most horrifying moment came one winter night. I was in the kitchen, when I noticed a rancid smell like rotting meat and sulfur. I followed it down to the basement. The walls were wet. At first, I thought it was water damage, but when I touched the black sludge oozing from the bricks, it was warm, and it moved, almost like it was alive. I fell into a dark spiral after that. I started dreaming of things I couldn't explain, shadowy figures standing over my bed, women crying, children screaming. I'd wake up drenched in sweat. I felt like I was being hunted. Eventually, we fled the house. We left furniture behind. I wrote a book, yes, but not to capitalize on the horror, to warn others, to put it somewhere outside of me. But even now, when I drive down Brownsville Road, I can't look at it. That house still sits there, quiet, unchanged, like a predator waiting. Because whatever was in that house never left. This story wasn't mine originally, but it left a mark on me deeper than most of my own encounters. I've walked those halls, I've stood in those rooms, and I've felt what lingers there, waiting. The house stands in Cheltenham, in Quiet, upper middle-class suburb with tree-lined streets and Georgian architecture. You'd never guess what lurks behind those brick walls. From the outside, the house is stately, even inviting. Ivy crawls up the facade, large windows catch the light just right. But the moment you step in, the air thickens. Every footstep feels louder than it should, and there's a strange stillness that clings to your skin like damp fog. The haunting began in the late 1800s. A family moved in, a well-to-do couple and their 3 daughters. They wanted a fresh start, but instead they were introduced to her. They called her the Woman in Black. She didn't storm in with chaos. She arrived quietly, first seen gliding across the upstairs landing late at night, veiled, completely silent. Her long black dress flowed behind her like it was floating in water. No footsteps, no words, just the presence of someone who didn't belong, and yet somehow did. Over time, more and more people saw her, the family's guests, neighbors passing on the street. One man delivering coal swore he saw a pale woman staring out the upstairs window. But when he rang the bell to warn the family someone had broken in, no one was there. The family checked the window, it was locked from the inside. Eventually, the sightings couldn't be dismissed. 17 different individuals over 2 decades documented their encounters with her. Some described her as elegant, with a posture too perfect to be living. Others said her veil shimmered, as if wet. One woman swore she made eye contact through the veil and said her eyes were not human at all, but black, deep, and endless like wells. The most chilling part? No one ever heard her speak. Not a breath, not a whisper, just her silent drifting through the hallways, and that crushing sense of sorrow she brought with her. People said the house made them feel things: deep sadness, anxiety, dread. Not because of what she did, but because of what she was. The family eventually left, not because she harmed them, but because they couldn't take the emotional toll anymore. Their daughters grew pale and quiet. One stopped speaking altogether. Visitors refused to come inside. The house developed a reputation, and over time was passed from owner to owner, each staying shorter than the last. The Society for Psychical Research, the world's oldest organization for studying the paranormal, investigated the house thoroughly. They recorded temperature shifts, electromagnetic fluctuations, even unexplained photographs where faint outlines of a veiled figure appeared in doorways. They concluded it was one of the most credible hauntings ever documented. When I first visited, it was for research. I wasn't expecting to feel anything. I'd been to dozens of so-called haunted locations. Most were theatrical. But this house was different. From the second I crossed the threshold, I felt like I was being watched. The air was motionless, unnatural. There were no creaks, No wind, no distant traffic, just silence. I explored the second floor, the hallway where most sightings occurred. The moment I turned the corner near the master bedroom, my chest tightened, my breath caught. I didn't see her, but I knew something was behind me. I turned slowly, expecting to catch a shadow, a trick of the light, but there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of weight, like the air was pressing down, like I was being mourned by something I couldn't see. The guide who accompanied me, an elderly man who'd lived in Cheltenham, all his life refused to go upstairs. He said he'd been in the house once, 30 years ago, only once. He told me she knows who she wants to see. I didn't stay long, maybe 20 minutes, but as I was leaving, I glanced back, just one seat, the upstairs window. The curtain moved. Not with the wind. There was no wind that day. It parted, like someone was looking out. Behind the glass, I saw it, just for a second. A silhouette, female, still, watching. I turned and walked away without saying a word. To this day, I don't know what her story is. Some say she was a widow, grieving a lost child. Others claim she was a victim of betrayal, locked away and forgotten. Whatever the truth is, she doesn't seem angry, but she's not at rest either. That house still stands, people live there, but never for long, and no one sleeps well. Because in the quiet hours of the night, when the world goes still, she walks. This happened in New Delhi, not some remote village, not a crumbling colonial ruin. This was a modern apartment, tucked inside a dense urban sprawl where tradition and technology coexist awkwardly. I was part of a small team of investigators, 3 of us, experienced in what most people would call fringe work. We weren't ghost hunters. We didn't wear matching vests or carry proton packs. We were researchers. We dealt with anomalies that slipped through the cracks of logic and stayed just long enough to disturb lives. And this case still keeps me up at night. We were contacted by a family in East Delhi, middle class, educated, not the type to cry ghost at every flicker of light. They were desperate. The mother barely made it through the phone call. Her voice cracked when she said, "We think it's the doll." At first we didn't take it seriously. I've heard of dolls moving, dolls crying, dolls setting off EMF spikes, but it's usually nonsense or overactive imaginations. But something in her voice, something trembling and hollow, made me say yes. When we arrived, the apartment looked normal, lived in, but clean. A father, mother, and an 8-year-old girl named Rito. She'd passed away 6 months earlier. They didn't say how at first. The grief was too fresh, too raw. The doll was placed on a cushion in Ria's room. Pink dress, plastic smile, the kind of toy you'd see in any department store. But its eyes, they weren't black. They were grey, cloudy. Like they'd been rubbed too much. The father said no one had touched the doll since the funeral. No one dared. It began with noises, doors slamming, lights flickering during full power, the television switching on at night, playing static. The mother swore the doll moved positions during the night, even when the door was locked from the outside. I was skeptical, until the first night we stayed. We set up cameras in every room, audio recorders, salt lines. We even used religious protections from multiple faiths, Hindu, Christian, Islamic, just to cover all bases. That night, nothing happened. But the second night, everything changed. I was asleep in the guest room when I felt a burning pain on my forearm. I thought it was a mosquito bite, until I turned on the light. It was a bite mark. Human, small, like a child's. I rushed into the living room where my colleague Aaron was sleeping. He was sitting upright on the couch, eyes open but glassy. He was murmuring. At first I thought he was having a nightmare, but the words weren't English, and they weren't Hindi either. He was speaking in Bengali. Fluent, rhythmic sentences, but Aaron doesn't know Bengali. He's from Gujarat. He barely knows how to say hello in any other language. We played the recording back later. The voice wasn't his. The accent, the cadence site was female, young, and it was threatening us. That morning, when we checked the footage, the doll had moved, not in real time, just frame by frame. First on the bed, then on the floor, then sitting against the closed door. No one had entered the room. We tried to remove the doll, hoping it would break whatever hold it had. We sealed it in a box, wrapped it with Rudraksha beads, prayed over it. But the next morning it was back, sitting on the bed, staring. We brought in a priest. He was reluctant, said he'd never dealt with an object so charged. He performed a cleansing, recited Sanskrit mantras for over 2 hours. As he reached the final chants, a loud knock echoed through the apartment. 3 knocks, always 3. When he placed the doll in a glass display case and locked it, the air shifted. It felt colder, but lighter, like something had been forced into silence, at least for a while. We left that case in a small basement room of the apartment building storage facility, but here's the part that still haunts me. 2 weeks later, the building's watchman called the family. He'd gone into the basement to check a fuse box, and when he turned around, the doll was sitting in the hallway outside the locked storage room. He swore it blinked. I haven't gone back since. Aaron refused to work cases for over a year after that, but the family moved. The apartment was never rented again. Locals say they hear laughter coming from the empty unit, some night slight, girlish laughter. As for the doll, no one knows where it is now. But if you ever come across a pink doll in a second-hand shop in Delhi with cloudy grey eyes, don't take it home, no matter how cheap it is. Not every story ends with answers. Some stories just pause. Because when you deal with the paranormal, when you walk the narrow edge between what's explainable and what isn't, you start to realize something most people never want to admit. Not everything is meant to be understood. A house in Pennsylvania that bled darkness into a family's life until it drove them away. A silent woman who walked the halls of a quiet Cheltenham home, leaving sorrow in her wake, but never speaking a word. And a plastic doll in New Delhi that held onto the soul of something angry, something ancient, something still watching. These weren't horror movie sets. These weren't tourist attractions. These were real places, real people, real terror. You might think, that would never happen to me. You lock your doors at night, you keep the lights on, you burn sage when you feel off. But the truth is, if something wants in, it doesn't knock, it just waits. It waits in the corner of your bedroom, just outside your field of vision. It waits in the pause between waking and dreaming. It waits in the silence, after you hear your name whispered when you're alone in your home, or at least you thought you were. And sometimes it waits inside you, because the scariest part isn't that these things exist. It's that they follow. And when you close this video, when you walk away from the screen, part of the story stays with you. Maybe tonight, as you turn off the light, you'll remember the voice from the basement, the shadow in the window, the doll that wouldn't stay put. And if you do, don't look too long into the darkness, because sometimes it looks back. There's something about rain that makes us feel safe, like it's washing the world clean, keeping us inside where it's warm and dry. But not everything stays outside. Tonight, we're stepping into the kind of night where the rain doesn't bring peace. It brings something else. These are true stories of what can happen when the downpour starts and the shadows get closer. Stories that prove sometimes it's not thunder that wakes you up in the middle of the night. It's something much worse. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania. The kind of place where people still leave their front doors unlocked. Well, some do. I'm not one of them. It's not because the neighborhood is dangerous, but more because of a night that changed the way I think about safety forever. This happened 2 years ago during late October. I remember because it was just before Halloween. It had been raining all day, and by nightfall, it turned into one of those heavy downpours, constant, steady, with wind that pushed the rain sideways. I was home alone that night. My wife was away visiting her sister, and I had just settled in for a quiet evening. I was reading in the living room, the lights low, with some jazz playing in the background. The atmosphere was actually kind of cozy until I heard the first knock. It was soft, just 3 light taps. I froze for a second, not even sure I heard it right. The rain was loud against the windows, and I thought maybe it was just something falling outside. But then it came again, this time louder, slower, more deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I stood up and walked to the door. We have a glass panel to the side of the door, so you can see who's out there. But the porch light wasn't on, and it was too dark to make anything out. I reached for the switch and flipped it on. There was a man standing there. He wasn't moving, wasn't knocking anymore, just standing. His head was slightly bowed, and he wore an old raincoat with the hood pulled halfway up. I could barely make out his face, but what stood out the most was that he wasn't wet. His coat had some drops on it, sure, but he wasn't soaked like you'd expect in weather like that. I didn't open the door. I just called out, "Can I help you?" He looked up, just a little. Enough that I could see the edges of his face. He had a blank expression, no emotion at all. He didn't answer. "Do you need help?" I asked again, louder this time. Still nothing. He just tilted his head slightly to the side. That's when I noticed he wasn't standing on the doormat. He was standing just to the left of it, as if he intentionally avoided stepping directly in front of the door. I grabbed my phone from the counter. When I looked back, he was gone. I opened the door, heart pounding, and looked around. Nothing. Just the sound of the rain. No footsteps on the walkway. No car idling nearby. I shut the door, locked it, and checked every window in the house. I stayed up the rest of the night, barely blinking. The next morning, I looked at the porch camera footage. It recorded the man walking up, standing there for 10 minutes without moving, and then just gone. He didn't walk away. He didn't leave through the front. He just vanished from frame. I still live in that house, but I installed floodlights, motion sensors, and I never leave the porch light off especially on rainy nights. When I was 17, I worked part-time at a pizza place a few towns over. We didn't have a car, so I had to rely on the late bus to get home most nights. One shift, I stayed late to help clean after a rush, and I ended up missing the usual 10-15 bus. The next one wasn't until 11:30. It was pouring outside, cold, early spring rain, the kind that seeps through your shoes and jacket and makes every minute outside miserable. The bus stop was about 2 blocks away, and it was completely deserted when I got there. I remember sitting on the bench under the tiny shelter, just trying to stay dry. My hoodie was soaked. I was scrolling through my phone, headphones in, trying to distract myself, when I noticed something weird. The light above the bench was flickering. Not a big deal, it's an old stop, but it kept flickering in a rhythm, almost like Morse code. I took out one earbud and listened. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. I looked up and saw a man approaching slowly from across the street. He wasn't running, but he wasn't walking normal either. It was like every step was intentional, exaggerated. He wore a black coat, and his head was down. At first, I thought he might be homeless, but something about the way he moved made me freeze. He stopped at the edge of the sidewalk about 15 feet from the bus shelter and just stood there, in the pouring rain. I was under the shelter. He wasn't. He was getting drenched, but didn't seem to care. I tried not to look at him directly, hoping he'd just keep moving, but then he took a step closer, and another. He stopped again just a few feet away now. "Waiting for the bus?" he asked. His voice was low, raspy. I didn't respond at first. Then I managed to nod and say, "Yeah." He smiled, a wide, slow grin. "You know it's not coming," he said. That caught me off guard. "What?" He just repeated, "It's not coming." I started checking my phone for the bus schedule, but my hands were shaking. When I looked up again, he was closer, right outside the shelter now, looking in. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You already missed it. The next one's mine." I stood up, not sure what he meant. I was about to walk away when he suddenly reached into his coat. I bolted down the street, slipping on the wet pavement. I didn't look back. I ran into a gas station and asked the clerk to call the police. They sent a car to check the bus stop, but the guy was gone. The next morning, I got a call from the dispatcher. They said they checked the nearby traffic cam footage. There was no one on the street, no one waiting by the shelter. But I know what I saw. I never took the late bus again. I live in a 2-story house with my sister. It's a classic mother-daughter arrangement, meaning we each have our own separate kitchen. My sister, who's in her mid-20s, takes the downstairs apartment, and I have the upstairs. She's often not around, staying at her boyfriend's place about 20 miles away. I'm 30, and while I really shouldn't be the kind of person to get spooked when I'm home alone, I'll admit it happens. Sometimes, when the silence gets too thick, the house feels a lot bigger than it actually is. One of those nights was last fall. I was sitting alone in the living room, watching a scary movie typical for a quiet evening. The house is open and spacious, so the living room, dining room, and kitchen all blend into one large area. My couch sits right in the middle of it all. When I watch TV from there, my back is to most of the house, which, for anyone who's easily spooked, is probably not the best spot to be alone in the dark. The movie was one of those creepy psychological thrillers that gets under your skin. As I watched, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every now and then, despite the fact that I knew I was alone. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the isolation, playing tricks on me. After the movie ended, I turned off the TV, brushed my teeth, and made my way to bed. The house was quiet again. I turned off all the lights as usual. My bed is upstairs, so I tucked myself in, feeling that familiar sense of peace that comes from being home. I finally started drifting off to sleep, the weight of the day leaving my body. But that sense of peace didn't last long. 2 hours later, I woke up with a start. At first, I wasn't sure why, but then I heard it, a voice. At first, I thought it was just a fragment of a dream, but as I listened more carefully, it sounded unmistakably like my sister's voice, clear, echoing faintly through the house. She wasn't supposed to be home. She was with her boyfriend, 20 miles away. Still groggy and disoriented, I lay there for a few seconds, trying to shake off the sleep. The voice didn't stop. I heard her calling my name. It wasn't a casual, everyday call either. It was the kind of voice you use when you're trying to get someone's attention in a hurry, like when you're frustrated or trying to warn them. But that didn't make sense. She couldn't have been home. I couldn't figure it out. I thought maybe she had come back unexpectedly. Maybe there was some sort of argument with her boyfriend, and she had decided to come home early. As my mind raced, I pushed myself out of bed, walking into the dark hallway, trying to make sense of it all. The voice continued. I flipped on the hallway lights, and then I made my way down the stairs. The The house was cold and silent, like it had been all night. I called out to her, my voice shaky with confusion. "What is it?" I shouted, half expecting her to answer right away. I moved through the living room, slowly, trying to get my bearings, but the house felt off. It was like the air itself was thicker than usual. I reached the foyer, and still, there was no sign of her. I looked around the dark hallway leading to her kitchen. The house felt like a labyrinth, even though it was just 2 floors. I finally reached the kitchen and flicked on the light. It slowly flickered to life, illuminating the space, but I saw no one. My sister wasn't standing there, and her boyfriend wasn't in sight either. I walked into her bedroom, expecting to find her there, but it was empty. I called her name again, louder this time. "Sarah, are you home?" I yelled into the dark, but only silence answered me back. That's when I heard it. A loud thud, like something heavy falling to the ground. It came from the bedroom, the one I had just checked. I rushed back in to see if I could find what had fallen, but there was nothing. The room was still perfectly in place. I started feeling dizzy, like I was losing touch with reality. I rushed back upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I locked myself in my room, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone and called my sister. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. I sat there, staring at the phone screen, trying to convince myself I had imagined everything, that maybe the stress or the dark movie had messed with my head. But something kept gnawing at me, telling me it was real. That night, I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I woke up and checked my phone to see a text from Sarah. "Why did you call me at 1 a.m.? I asked her if she had come home, and she replied, "No, I'm still at Mike's house." That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I went downstairs to check her bedroom for any signs of what had fallen, but there was nothing at all. I tried to tell myself I was just overreacting. Maybe I had imagined it, but the vividness of her voice and the strange noise were too real to be dismissed so easily. I tried to ignore the feeling of unease that clung to me all day, but I couldn't shake it. It was as though something was watching me. Fast forward a few years, I was 14, left home alone again. This time, my mum was working overnight. My brother was away at college, and it was just me and my younger sister. It was a Friday night. My mum worked long shifts at the hospital, so nights like this were common. I was hanging out with a friend, Molly. We spent the night watching movies and chatting, and eventually she had to leave since her parents didn't like her staying out too late. After she left, I was left alone. I went back to my room to play a video game. It was an old Star Wars game I loved. My bedroom had a window that overlooked the backyard. I had just gotten comfortable when I heard a scraping sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. A chair being dragged across the deck. I froze. The sound came from outside, but it wasn't the wind, it was a distinct scraping. I got up and looked out the window. To my surprise, I saw someone sitting in one of the deck chairs in the backyard. I thought it might have been Molly coming back, but no, it wasn't her. It was a man, someone I didn't recognize. He sat in the chair, staring up at my window. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I immediately pulled away from the window, my heart racing. I texted a few friends asking if they were messing with me, but they all said no. Nobody knew anything about it. That's when the panic really set in. I dared to look out the window again. He was still there, staring directly up at me. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I quickly turned off the TV and huddled in the corner of my room, wrapping my arms around my knees. I sat there in silence, not wanting to move, not wanting to draw attention to myself. I waited for what felt like an eternity before I finally mustered up the courage to look out the window again. There he was, still sitting in that chair, not moving. I decided to confront him. "What do you want?" I called down, my voice shaky but loud. At first, there was no response. Then, I noticed his shoulders starting to shake. He wasn't responding verbally, but it was like he was laughing to himself, a silent, eerie laugh. The kind that made your skin crawl. I backed away from the window and hurried back to my bed, unsure what to do next. I didn't want to call the police yet, because I didn't know what was really happening. But then, I heard the back door. It was being pushed. He was trying to get inside. I panicked. I grabbed my phone, but I was too scared to make the call. I hid in my room, under the covers, listening to the sounds of the house. I heard the front door being tested next. It felt like he was checking every door. For a moment, I thought I was going to die in my own home. But after a few long minutes, the sound stopped. I never heard him again. I waited until the next morning, heart still pounding, wondering if the whole thing had been a nightmare. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been very, very wrong. These experiences, the ones that blur the line between reality and fear, have a way of staying with you. Whether it's hearing voices in the night or seeing a stranger in your own backyard, it changes you. It makes you question everything, your perception, your safety, and even your own mind. And the hardest part? You never really know when the next shadow will cross your path. Rain has a way of making the world feel smaller. It muffles sound, hides shadows, and pulls everything into a slow, eerie quiet. But sometimes, it doesn't just change the way the world feels, it changes the way it behaves. A stranger on your porch who doesn't belong there. A man at the bus stop who speaks in riddles and disappears like he was never real to begin with. These aren't just stories about bad luck or creepy coincidences. They're reminders that the unknown often hides in plain sight right outside your door, or standing just beyond the glow of a flickering street lamp. So if you ever find yourself alone on a rainy night, listening to the soft knock of water on glass or the steady drip outside your window, just make sure that's all you're hearing. Because sometimes, the rain doesn't just keep things out. It brings something in. They say some places carry memories that refuse to die. Tonight we check into a hotel where darkness lingers in every corner, and once you step inside, you may never truly leave. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Welcome to one of the most chilling hotel experiences ever recorded. It was supposed to be a cheap, quick stay. Back in 2019, I flew to LA for a few job interviews. Last-minute travel meant last-minute bookings, and I ended up finding this insanely cheap room downtown. It was the old Cecil Hotel. I'd vaguely heard about it before, something about a girl disappearing in the water tank, a few serial killers who'd lived there, but honestly, at the time, I just needed a bed and a roof. The lobby felt old, not vintage, not charming, just tired. A heavy scent of mildew clung to the air. The elevator was one of those old cage-like ones where you had to pull the gate closed yourself. Room 1402. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean enough. Tiny window, battered desk, small bed, perfectly forgettable. I should have known it wouldn't stay that way. The first weird thing happened around 2 a.m. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep despite the buzzing fluorescent light in the hallway outside my door. That's when I heard it. Soft tapping. At first, I thought it was coming from the window, but the room was so small that it became clear pretty fast it was the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. I waited for a voice to knock and housekeeping or security or something. Nothing. Just silence. I stayed frozen in bed, heart pounding, staring at the door. Then the handle jiggled. Softly but definitely, someone was trying the door. I jumped up, deadbolted it again, even though I had already locked it earlier. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. No answer. Footsteps retreated slowly down the hall. I told myself it was just some drunk guy, wrong room, no big deal. But when I finally got back into bed, something didn't sit right. Something heavy pressed down on my chest, a feeling I hadn't felt since I was a kid scared of the dark. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of running water. The bathroom sink was on. I know I hadn't used it before bed. My throat tightened as I got up and crept toward the bathroom door, which was half closed. As I pushed it open, the faucet turned off by itself. The room went silent again. No one there. I backed away, whispering, "Nope, nope, nope," to myself like a prayer. I packed up my stuff in a frenzy, planning to get the hell out of there right then and there. When I opened the door to the hallway, it was empty, but all the lights were flickering violently. As I made my way to the elevator, I passed a door marked 1402. It was wide open, but the room beyond was pitch black. In that darkness, I swear I saw movement. A shape just standing there, watching. I didn't wait to find out. I took the stairs all the way down, almost breaking my neck in the process. When I got to the lobby, the night clerk barely looked up. I mumbled something about emergency and leaving early. He didn't even blink, just slid me a clipboard to sign. It was almost like he was used to it. When I finally got into my rental car and drove away, I felt that heavy pressure on my chest lift. I later found out room 1402 had been the site of multiple suicides back when the Cecil was at its most infamous. Sometimes I wonder if something there was trying to invite me to stay longer, permanently. In 2014, I stayed at a hotel in downtown Los Angeles during a trip to visit some college friends. I didn't know anything about the hotel's history when I booked it. It was cheap, close to the places we wanted to explore, and from the photos looked all right. What I didn't realize was that the hotel had a different name when it was infamous. The Cecil Hotel. The place where people had disappeared, where people had died. I found that out much later. The first night was fine. I checked into a small, cramped room on the 10th floor. The walls were thin. I could hear the elevators creaking up and down all night, but I wrote it off as just an old building. It wasn't until the second night that things got strange. I was coming back late around 11 p.m. and decided to take the elevator instead of the stairs. When the doors opened, there was no one inside. I pressed 10. The doors stayed open. I pressed door close. Nothing. I thought maybe it was just slow, but after nearly a full minute, the doors were still wide open. I was about to step off and try another elevator when I heard it. A soft, wet, dragging sound, like bare feet sliding across the floor, coming from down the hall. I stepped back into the elevator and frantically hit the door close button again. This time the doors slowly slid shut. The ride up was excruciatingly slow. Every floor the elevator passed, I felt a pressure like someone was standing inches away from me, breathing down my neck. When I finally reached my floor, I practically ran to my room. I barely slept. At around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of water running, but it wasn't coming from my bathroom. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. A slow, heavy trickle, almost like something leaking or something being dragged. I turned on every light in the room and sat on the bed, fully clothed, until morning. The next day, I mentioned it casually to a friend who lived in LA. Her face went pale. "You're staying where?" she asked. When I told her, she immediately told me to get out. She said the Cecil had been shut down for a while after the death of a girl named Elisa Lamb. They found her body in a water tank on the roof. She'd been missing for weeks. Guests had been complaining about water pressure issues and bad tasting water before they found her. She said there were rumors Elisa had been acting strangely in the elevator the night she disappeared, like she was hiding from someone or something. There's even video footage, she said. Footage that shows her frantically pressing elevator buttons, stepping in and out of the car, looking terrified. I didn't finish my stay. I checked out immediately. As I was leaving, dragging my suitcase toward the lobby, I swear I heard it again. That soft dragging sound, following me down the hall. I didn't turn around. When I got outside into the sunlight, it felt like surfacing from underwater. I don't know what happened to Elisa Lam. I don't know what haunts those walls. But I do know this. Some places collect tragedies. Some places never let them go. And if you ever find yourself in an elevator that won't close its doors, get out before something else gets in. Last winter, I had to travel for a work conference in a small city I'd never been to before. The company booked my hotel, a place I'd never heard of, but it was downtown, cheap, and near the conference center, so I didn't think much of it. The hotel itself was strange. Old, tired, quiet. The front desk clerk barely looked up when I checked in. The lobby smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and dust. It felt like stepping into a place stuck 20 years in the past. They handed me the key, an actual metal key, not a card, and told me I'd be staying in room 209. As I rode the elevator up, I noticed how empty the place was. I didn't pass a single other guest in the hallways. Room 209 was at the far end of a dimly lit corridor. The overhead lights flickered, and the carpet was threadbare, patterned with faded floral prints that might have once been cheerful, but now just looked sad. When I unlocked the door, the room felt colder than the hallway. It was a basic setup. Small bed, cheap dresser, a tiny TV bolted to the wall. But something about it felt off, like the air inside hadn't been disturbed in a long time. Still, I was tired from the drive. I threw my bag on the chair and decided to take a shower. The bathroom was old, cracked tiles and a mirror with darkened edges. When I stepped out of the shower, the mirror was fogged over. And written into the fog, I swear I saw something. A word. Leave. I blinked, wiped the mirror clean. Nothing there. Just my reflection, looking pale and rattled. I told myself it must have been my imagination. Steam patterns, nothing more. But as the night wore on, the room got colder. I kept fiddling with the thermostat, but the heater stayed silent. Around 1:30 a.m., I was lying in bed, half asleep when I heard it. A knocking sound, faint, deliberate, coming from the closet door across the room. 3 knocks. Slow, even. I sat up, my heart thudding. The closet door was shut. I hadn't opened it since arriving. Another 3 knocks. I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling. Old pipes. Anything but what it sounded like. I turned on the TV for noise, but it barely worked. Static buzzed across the screen. The remote barely responded. Then, over the static, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time. Against my better judgment, I grabbed the chair and wedged it under the doorknob to the closet. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know. I left the lights on and curled up under the covers, staring at the door. At some point, I must have drifted into an uneasy sleep, because I woke up around 3:00 a.m. to something even worse. The chair was knocked over. The closet door was cracked open just barely, but enough that I could see darkness beyond it. And the room was freezing. I grabbed my phone, heart racing. I was about to call the front desk when I noticed something else. In the reflection of the TV screen, not on the screen itself, but in the reflection, I saw a shape standing by the closet door. Tall, thin. Still, I spun around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the reflection, it was gone too. That was it. I threw on my clothes, shoved everything into my bag, and bolted out of room 209. I didn't even bother checking out of the desk. I just left. I ended up sleeping in my car that night in a nearby supermarket parking lot. When morning finally came, I went back to the hotel to officially check out. The clerk barely reacted. It was almost like he was used to it. As I handed back the key, he glanced at my paperwork and said, almost absently, "You were in 209, huh?" I nodded, not really wanting to talk about it. He hesitated for a second, then muttered under his breath, "That room always has problems." I didn't ask him what he meant. I didn't want to know. All I know is that I'll never stay in a hotel without reading the reviews again. Some rooms aren't just empty. Some rooms are waiting. Hotels are meant to be temporary homes, places to rest, to hide from the world outside. But sometimes, something is already waiting inside those walls. Old tragedies, forgotten whispers, restless shadows. They don't care if you just booked a room for one night. Because once you cross the threshold, you're part of the story too. And not every guest gets to check out. Let me set the scene. I go to a small university in Northern California, definitely not one of the spotlight UCs like LA or Berkeley. But students here, like at any campus, love a good excuse to party. Some bigger schools have infamous days dedicated to unhinged fun, like Sun God Day at UCSD or Flotopia at UCSB. My school doesn't throw anything quite on that level, but some students, including my friends, like to road trip to these events. Till this year, I'd never joined one of those road trips, but it hit me that I was graduating soon, and I had nothing remotely wild to look back on. So when my buddies suggested we hit up UCSB for Flotopia, I caved. We left on a Friday afternoon in my friend Nolan's beat-up Subaru. The crew, Nolan, Drew, Raj, Adam, and me. We're all pretty tall guys, so the ride was uncomfortable, but tolerable with good music and trash talk. Once we arrived in Isla Vista, finding parking was a nightmare. The area was teeming with beachgoers and party traffic. After circling the blocks for nearly an hour, Nolan managed to flirt our way into parking at a random girl's spot. It was one of those stupid lucky moments you just laugh about. Nolan's cousin Talia lived nearby and agreed to let us crash at her place for the weekend, which was huge, considering how packed and expensive everything is during Flotopia. Our roommates were chill, and the place had enough floor space for all 5 of us. That night, even though the actual event was still hours away, we decided to pre-party with them. Before I continue, let me introduce someone. Sean. He's not a part of our group, not really. Sean's one of those fringe guys of mutual acquaintance who tries way too hard to be involved. He's loud, self-centered, and crosses social lines like they're not even there. The kind of guy who invites himself everywhere and assumes it's cool. Apparently Sean had mentioned to Nolan weeks ago that he was also going to Flotopia. We hadn't planned anything with him. In fact, his name didn't even come up during our car ride. So, naturally, we were stunned when we saw him standing outside the liquor store that night while we were picking up drinks. He didn't say hi. He just kind of joined our group and started walking back with us, like he belonged. A few blocks from the store, he finally asked, "Why do you guys look surprised?" Like we hadn't just run into him by chance. No one responded. It was awkward, but we just kept moving. Things got weirder when we got to Talia's place. Sean asked to use the bathroom and then bolted ahead. Talia answered the door, and before she could say anything, Sean barged in and said, "I'm staying here this weekend." She, understandably confused, just assumed he was part of our group and let him in. When Nolan found out, he was furious. He pulled Sean aside and told him to leave. Told him straight up that lying to his cousin was not okay. Sean didn't take it well. He stood outside for like 20 minutes, pleading to be let back in. Eventually, Nolan slammed the door in his face. We moved on, drank way too much, and laughed about Sean's audacity. But later, we realized something chilling. Nolan had been sharing his iPhone location with Sean for months back and never turned it off. The next day, Flowtopia was everything we expected. Crowded beaches, chaotic energy, tons of sunburns. By the late afternoon, we were back at Talia's place, joined by more friends who had shown up from nearby schools. We recounted the whole Sean ordeal, and one of the guys, Max, checked his phone and said, "Wait, I still have Sean's location from a group project we did." We all crowded around Max's phone. The location dot practically on top of us. The moment we pointed it out, it started moving fast, like someone had been watching and suddenly drove off. It was creepy, but no one took it seriously. We chalked it up to Sean being obsessive and desperate. We joked about it and continued partying. That night, we crashed hard. I woke up sometime after 2 a.m. to what sounded like a loud pop. It took me a second to register. Glass. I scrambled off the floor and realized no one else had stirred. Then I spotted it. The sliding balcony door was shattered. A rock was in the middle of the room. I panicked, grabbed a wine bottle from the floor, and crept toward the living room. I thought maybe I'd call the cops after waking someone up. But then I noticed the closet door handle move. Someone was inside. I froze. My mind went blank with fear. I was about to open the door myself when I hesitated. Something in my gut told me not to. I backed away and woke Nolan. He groggily followed me to the living room. But by the time we got there, the closet door was wide open and empty, or so we thought. Nolan stepped forward, bent down, and picked something up. A knife. A long one. Like disturbingly long. We realized Sean must have broken in and hidden in the closet, armed. If I had opened that door alone, who knows what would have happened. We woke everyone else up, did a full sweep, and called the police. The officers took our statements but said we weren't the only ones targeted that night. Property damage is common during Flowtopia, and no one could confirm Sean had been there. Max checked his phone again. Sean had removed him from location sharing. All of us were blocked. It was like he had vanished. Ghosted us in real life. We left the next morning shaken. Nolan wrote a long message to Sean ever delivered. Weeks passed and none of us heard from him. Not even mutual friends knew what happened. Sean was just gone. I'm still nervous as hell thinking about it. He knows where most of us live. If he could do that in Isla Vista, what's to stop him from showing up again? If anything happens, I'll let you know. But for now, all I can do is stay alert. I was 21 when this happened early spring, junior year of college. My roommate Alex and I had this impulsive idea to drive out to Joshua Tree for the weekend. We'd been swamped with midterms and projects, and I think we just needed something weird and spontaneous to break the cycle. The plan was simple. We'd leave Friday afternoon, drive through the night, camp somewhere near the national park, then head back Sunday. The drive was long but manageable, mostly open highway, dotted with forgotten gas stations and sketchy rest stops. That part of California is beautiful in a very unsettling way. It's wide and quiet and empty. As night fell, we turned off the main route to take a less crowded, scenic road that cut through the desert. It saved time, supposedly. We were an hour into the detour when our phone signals died. No bars, no service. We hadn't seen another car in almost 20 minutes, which seemed odd for a Friday night. The road was smooth at first, but got narrower and bumpier the deeper we went. That's when we saw a ton of those hand-painted wooden signs nailed to a post. Desert View Inn, 5 miles. Below it, in black marker, Gas Gia1 snacks. Alex and I looked at each other. We weren't exactly low on gas, but we could use snacks and maybe a bathroom. Plus, we figured it was better to have a rough location in mind now that our GPS was dead. So we followed the sign. The road got rougher, more cracked, like it hadn't been maintained in years. Still, the signs kept appearing every mile or so. Desert View Inn, 4 miles, then 3, and so on. By the time we saw the final one, it was almost midnight, and finally, we spotted it. The inn looked like an old roadside motel from the 50s, flat roof, chipped paint, that burnt orange desert glow. There were no lights on, but a beat-up vending machine flickered weakly outside the office. We pulled into the gravel lot and parked. There were no other cars. The silence hit me. Not just quiet, dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, no sound at all. I stepped out of the car and felt it instantly. The the kind of silence that doesn't feel natural. I think Alex felt it too because he said, "Let's just get snacks and go." We walked up to the vending machine. It was empty, totally empty. The machine was on, humming, but all the slots were bare. That's when we noticed the door to the office slightly ajar. I don't know why we went in. The inside was dusty. A single desk, a faded register book, no lights, no one at the counter. On the wall behind the desk were actual keys, like from an old movie, each on a hook labeled 1 through 12. Every hook was full except one, room 6. Alex said something like, "This is sketchy as hell," but I was too busy staring at the wall behind the counter. It had Polaroids pinned each one showing a guest standing outside room 6. Same angle, same lighting. There were maybe 20 photos, and in every one, the person was standing alone. But what got me was the captions. Each had a date, and the last few years were missing. The most recent photo was from 2013. I was about to say something when I heard a sound from outside. Not just a sound movement. Gravel crunching under slow footsteps. We ducked behind the desk and peeked out the office window. At the far end of the motel, right near room 6, was a man, tall, thin, dressed in all black. No flashlight, no phone. Just standing outside room 6, perfectly still, facing the door. Then he slowly turned, like he was listening for something. He looked directly toward the office. I don't know how he saw you as it was dark, and we weren't making noise, but he started walking our way. We didn't wait. Alex and I bolted out the side door, sprinted for the car, and floored it out of the lot. Gravel kicked up behind us. As we pulled back onto the main road, I looked in the mirror. The man was standing exactly where we'd parked, just watching us go. We didn't stop driving until we hit the highway 2 hours later. Still no cell service, but at least we saw other cars again. When we finally reached the national park, we didn't even bother camping. We pulled into a 24-hour diner and sat there until sunrise. Back at school, we tried Googling Desert View Inn. Nothing came up. The next weekend, we drove back to the area this time during the day with a full tank and better prep. We followed the same detour road, same route, same distance. There was no inn, just empty desert. About 4 years ago, I was on a solo road trip through the Midwest. I just left Minneapolis and was driving down toward Kansas City, planning to visit my aunt for the weekend. The entire trip was a spontaneous break from a bad job, and a worse breakup just me, my old Toyota Camry, and whatever podcasts or static-filled radio stations I could find along the way. It was a weekday, maybe Tuesday. The roads were empty, just long stretches of cracked pavement and cornfields on both sides. It wasn't even noon yet when my car started acting upsubtle at first, like sluggish acceleration, then jerking forward, and a warning light I didn't recognize. I pulled off at the next exit, which led to what looked like the edge of a ghost town. There was no cell service. My phone had one bar and couldn't load anything. So I did what anyone might do. I kept driving, hoping I'd spot a gas station or a mechanic before the car died completely. That's when I saw him. About a quarter mile down a gravel road, there was a small wooden garage with an old faded sign that read Earl's Repairs. The kind of place you'd drive past without a second thought. But the bay door was open, and I saw someone crouched over a tool bench inside. I pulled in. The guy who stepped out looked like he belonged there. Older, maybe late 50s, tall and wiry. His coveralls were sun-faded and stained with grease, and he had a slight limp in his left leg. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was calm, country slow. I nodded and explained what happened. He motioned for me to pop the hood and said he'd take a look. The place was eerily quiet. No other customers, no noise from the road. Just the sound of wind rustling the nearby wheat and the occasional clank of his tools. I remember thinking the guy seemed competent enough, quick with diagnostics, clear with explanations. He told me the fuel pump might be going bad, but he'd check the wiring first, see if it was something simple. While he worked, I walked around a bit and noticed how weirdly untouched the place looked. Dust on every window. A vending machine inside with snacks from at least 5 years ago. An old rotary phone mounted on the wall. It felt more like a museum than a working shop. After about 20 minutes, he told me he'd narrow the issue down to a clogged fuel filter. Easy fix, he said. Wouldn't even take an hour. I asked if there was anywhere nearby I could grab food or at least some coffee. He laughed and said, "Not unless you like warm root beer and off-brand chips." Then he motioned to a mini fridge in the corner of the garage and said I could help myself. The fridge was almost empty. Just a couple cans of soda and one bottle of water. I took the water, thanked him, and sat on a faded couch against the wall. This is where things started feeling off. He was working on the car, but every few minutes he'd glance over at me. Not quick glances either, long stares, like he was studying me. Once he caught me looking back and smiled. Not a creepy smile, more like a tired one. But it lingered too long. Still, I didn't want to be rude. I just sat quietly, sipping my water, trying not to make it weird. Around the 40-minute mark, he said, "Almost done. Want to come see?" I followed him out to the car, where he pointed at something near the engine and started explaining what he did. His tone was casual, but then he asked, "You traveling alone?" I lied and said my brother was on his way to meet me. His smile disappeared. "That right?" he said. I nodded, trying to play it cool. He didn't say anything else for a second, just stood there. Then, just like that, he changed the subject. Told me to start the car. It turned over perfectly. Relieved, I thanked him and asked how much I owed. He waved it off and said, "First time's on the house. You just remember old Earl next time you need help." I didn't argue. I got in the car, and as I pulled out of the lot, I saw him standing at the edge of the gravel, watching me drive away. I thought that was the end of it. But an hour later, I spotted the same pickup truck from his lot in my rearview mirror. Not close, just trailing me at a distance. I told myself it wasn't him. That a truck like that probably existed in every small town. But then it turned when I turned, slowed down when I did, matched my every lane change for nearly 15 miles. Eventually, I turned off onto a side road, trying to throw him off. The truck followed. I took another turn, still there. That's when the fear hit. I drove faster. I don't even know what direction I was heading anymore. Just away. At one point, I hit a stretch of straight road and floored it, pushing the old Camry way past what it was comfortable doing. When I finally reached a town, an actual town, with traffic and people, I pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store and parked between two SUVs. I waited, watching the entrance. No truck. After 10 minutes, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe I was being paranoid. I went inside the store, grabbed a snack and a bottle of water, and when I came back out, there it was, parked across the street. Same truck, same rusted rear fender, same cracked passenger mirror, but no one inside. I got in my car and drove straight to the police station. I didn't even know what to report, just told them I thought someone had followed me from a shop up north and was parked outside. An officer stepped outside with me to check. The truck was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. I checked my hotel room locks 5 times, pushed furniture against the door. I kept replaying everything, his questions, his stares, the sudden change in mood. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't lied about my brother. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. All I know is I never saw that man or that truck again. But every so often when I'm on long drives alone, I think about Earl's garage. I think about how empty that place was, how old it looked. And I wonder if anyone else ever stopped there, or if it even really existed. There's something about long drives that makes you feel untouchable, like the road will always lead somewhere safe, and the worst thing that could happen is a flat tire or running out of gas. But the truth is, when you're out there in unfamiliar places, surrounded by strangers and silence, your reality changes. You're not in control. Not really. Whether it's an obsessive acquaintance who can't take a hint, a mysterious figure waiting outside an abandoned motel room, or a seemingly kind stranger who watches a little too closely. The danger doesn't always look like danger until it's too late. Sometimes, the scariest part of the journey isn't getting lost. It's who's out there waiting for you. Tonight's story is about a town hidden away from the rest of the world. A town where darkness never truly falls. Make yourself comfortable and listen closely. I'm not really the type of person to believe in weird small-town legends. You know, the kind of stories about cursed towns or places where things aren't quite right. But after what happened to me last year, I don't know what to believe anymore. I'm a civil engineer, and last summer I got a contract job to help with infrastructure updates in a town called Harper's Hill. You probably haven't heard of it. It's tiny, way up in the northern part of the state, surrounded by endless forests. The drive out there was normal. Hours of highway, then hours of twisting back roads, until eventually I found myself pulling into Harper's Hill. It looked like every other small town. One main street, a diner, a post office, a handful of houses. It was late when I arrived, probably close to 10 p.m. I remember that because I was exhausted and just wanted to find the motel. But even though it should have been pitch black, the sky had this weird, dull blue glow, like it was stuck at dusk. At first, I thought it was just light pollution or something, but the weird thing was, there were no stars, no moon, just that dim, sickly blue light. It was like the sky had forgotten how to turn off. I checked into the motel, a rundown place with old yellow wallpaper peeling off the walls. The woman at the front desk barely said a word to me, just handed me a key and stared at me a little too long. That night, I couldn't sleep. Part of it was the travel, sure, but mostly it was the light seeping through the thin curtains. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't convince my body it was nighttime. It just wasn't dark enough. The next morning, I asked the diner waitress if it was always like this. She smiled a weird, tight-lipped smile and said, "Oh, you'll get used to it." I didn't. Every night for the next week, it was the same thing. That dim blue glow outside, that heavy, restless feeling inside me, like my body knew something was wrong, even if my brain tried to dismiss it. Worse than the light were the people. During the day, they acted normal enough, polite, reserved. But at night, if you could even call it night, I would catch glimpses of them through my motel window, walking slowly down the middle of the street, standing perfectly still in their front yards, staring up at the never-dark sky. I tried telling myself they were just night owls or whatever, but there was something about the way they moved or didn't move that made my skin crawl. One night, around 2 a.m., I couldn't sleep at all. I decided to go for a drive just to clear my head. I figured if I could get far enough out of town, maybe I'd find some real darkness. I drove and drove, past the houses, past the empty fields, past the dense black forest. But the sky stayed the same, that strange dim glow stretching on forever. After maybe 20 minutes, I realized something else. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, the town was still there. The same diner, the same gas station, the same crooked street lamp flickering in front of the post office. I hadn't gone anywhere. I turned off the car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I stared at the glowing horizon, trying to understand, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw them. People. Maybe a dozen of them, just standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. None of them moved. None of them said a word. I don't remember putting the car in gear. I don't remember turning around. I just remember flying back to the motel, locking the door, and lying on the bed with every light on. The next morning, I packed up and left. I didn't even wait for my final paycheck. I just drove, and this time, somehow, I made it out. It was only once I got 100 miles away that the sky finally turned black. Stars appeared. The moon hung high and full. I had to pull over and just sit there for a while, staring up at the real, honest darkness. I still don't know what happened in Harper's Hill. I don't know if it was some kind of phenomenon or something worse. All I know is I won't ever go back. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still feel that soft, sickly blue glow pressing against the windows of my new apartment, waiting, as if Harper's Hill never really let me leave. When I first moved into the new apartment, it felt like a fresh start. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and the idea of a blank slate sounded perfect. The apartment was small, nothing fancy, one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom with old tiles that were cracked in places, but it was cheap and close to work. The first few days were normal. I spent most of my time unpacking, getting used to the odd creaks and groans of the building. The bathroom mirror was a little strange, though. It was old, with tiny black spots creeping around the edges from age. I noticed it the first night I brushed my teeth. My reflection seemed a little off. At first, it was easy to explain away. Maybe the glass was warped, maybe the lighting was weird. But then I started noticing little things. Like I'd blink, and my reflection would blink just a half second too late. Or I'd tilt my head to the left, and the reflection would seem to hesitate before following. I told myself I was imagining it. Stress, exhaustion, loneliness, all of it adding up to play tricks on my mind. But it got worse. One night, I was brushing my teeth, half asleep, when I glanced up at the mirror. My reflection was already looking at me, staring before I'd even raised my head. I dropped my toothbrush into the sink, heart hammering in my chest. I stayed perfectly still, watching the mirror. My reflection stood there, smiling. I wasn't smiling. I backed out of the bathroom slowly, flicking the light switch off as I went. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that grin. The next morning, everything looked normal. No strange smiles, no delayed movements. Just my tired, worn-out face looking back at me. I convinced myself it had been a dream, a bad dream. Life went back to normal. For a little while. Then came the tapping. Late at night, I'd hear a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the bathroom. At first, I thought it was just the pipes or maybe a tree branch brushing against the building. But it always came from the mirror. I started noticing other strange things too. I'd leave the bathroom light off before going to bed, only to find it flicked on in the middle of the night. Small things would move. My toothbrush shifted to the other side of the sink. Towels fallen to the floor. I even caught a glimpse once of a handprint, not mine, smudged against the inside of the mirror. One night, I'd had enough. I got up, stormed into the bathroom, and yanked the light on. There it was, my reflection. Except it wasn't me. It looked like me, but wrong. The eyes were too wide, the smile too stiff. It tapped its fingers against the glass in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I stood there, frozen. My mind screamed at me to run, to do anything but stand there and stare. But I couldn't move. Then, the reflection moved its hand forward, pressing its palm flat against the inside of the mirror. And the glass rippled. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself. The reflection's smile grew wider, impossibly wide. It leaned forward, pressing against the glass, as if trying to push through. I ran out of the apartment that night. I didn't take anything with me. I didn't even lock the door. I just ran. I stayed with a friend for a few days, too ashamed to tell him the real reason why. I lied and said my apartment had plumbing issues. Eventually, I went back during the day to grab my things. I was terrified, but when I stepped inside, everything was still, quiet, normal. The mirror looked dusty, old, just a piece of glass, nothing more. I packed up as fast as I could, barely breathing, until I stepped outside again. I moved across town to a bigger place with a brand new bathroom and mirrors I installed myself. I tried to move on, made new friends, took up new hobbies, but the unease never fully left me. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of myself in shop windows or car mirrors and swear, just for a split second, that my reflection lingered a little too long after I turned away. Worse yet, sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling watched, not by someone in my room, no, by something inside the mirrors. I even started covering them at night, hanging towels over bathroom mirrors, pulling curtains over windows. I told myself it was irrational, but I did it anyway. Last week, though, something happened I can't explain away. I was brushing my teeth before bed, facing a mirror I'd left uncovered, half asleep, mind wandering, when I saw it. A smile that wasn't mine. Not a reflection, not a trick of the light. Just a smile, stretched unnaturally wide, appearing in the mirror where my face should have been. I dropped the toothbrush and backed away slowly, refusing to turn my back to it. The smile stayed, watching, waiting. And tonight, as I write this, the mirrors in my apartment are starting to ripple again. I'm not exactly the superstitious type. Ghost stories, urban legends, they were just that to me. Stories. But after what happened during my last semester at college, I don't laugh at those stories anymore. I had picked up a part-time job shelving books at the campus library. It was decent pay, and the hours were flexible. The only downside was that a few times a week, I had to work the late shift, leaving around 10 or 11 at night. The library sat next to a 5-level parking garage, mostly empty that late. My car was always parked somewhere near the top since the lower levels filled up during the day. It wasn't ideal, but it was usually quiet. At first, the nights were normal, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. But after a few weeks, I started noticing it, a slow, off-tune whistling. The first time I heard it, I figured it was just someone messing around. College kids were always doing weird things, but every night after that, whenever I left late, the whistling was there. It wasn't loud, it wasn't frantic, it was slow, calm, almost patient. And no matter what level I parked on, the whistling was always nearby. I'd glance around as I walked, but I never saw anyone, just empty rows of cars and the hollow echo of my own footsteps. It got under my skin. I started parking closer to the elevators, near other cars, trying to shake the feeling, but it didn't matter. The whistling always found me. One night, after a brutal cram session, I left even later than usual. The garage was practically deserted. I made it to the 3rd level, where I'd parked, and there it was again, the slow, broken tune, drifting through the concrete. Except this time, it was closer. I picked up my pace, keys gripped tight in my hand. I didn't run, but I wanted to. As I neared my car, something caught my eye across the garage, a tall figure standing between 2 columns, half hidden in the shadows. He was facing me. Even from that distance, I could tell he was whistling. His body swayed slightly with each broken note. I fumbled with my keys, cursing under my breath, and practically dove into my car. As I started the engine, I dared a glance toward where he had been standing. He was gone. I peeled out of there without looking back. The next few nights, I avoided working late. I made up excuses, swapped shifts, anything to stay away from that garage after dark. But eventually, it caught up with me. One night, After a group project ran longer than expected, I found myself walking toward the garage at nearly midnight. The campus was deserted, buildings dark and silent. I told myself I'd be quick. Get in. Get out. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, hoping to move faster. As I climbed to the 4th level where I'd parked, the whistling started again. It was closer than ever. My heart pounded in my ears. I stepped onto the 4th level and immediately spotted my car sitting under a lone, flickering light. And there he was, standing next to my car, hand lightly dragging across the roof, whistling that same broken tune. He was tall, unnaturally tall and thin, like his limbs were just a little too long. His head was tilted slightly, as if listening for me. I froze. He stopped whistling. Slowly, he turned his head toward me. Even from across the lot, I could feel his eyes locking onto mine. I don't remember running. I just remember slamming the stairwell door behind me, practically flying down the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't stop until I was back at the library, locking the doors and calling campus security. When they arrived and searched the garage, they found nothing. No man, no footprints, no signs of anyone even being there. They brushed it off, said maybe I'd been seeing things after a long night. Maybe. But I switched my schedule after that. No more late nights. And yet, sometimes, when I'm walking through a parking lot late at night, I swear I hear it. That same slow, broken whistling. Waiting. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed tonight's story, consider subscribing for more unsettling true experiences. Stay safe, and if you ever find yourself somewhere the night never comes, don't stay too long. Hiking is supposed to be peaceful, a way to escape the noise, to clear your mind, to reconnect with nature. But deep in the forests, the mountains, the forgotten trails, some things are waiting. Things that were never meant to be found. Tonight, these are 5 true hiking horror stories that prove some trails should never be walked alone. I've always been a fan of hiking. There's something about being completely cut off from the rest of the world that feels freeing. Back in 2017, I was studying abroad in Russia, and a friend of mine suggested we hike the Ural Mountains during our winter break. I was no stranger to cold, but Russia in February is something different entirely. We weren't doing anything too extreme, mostly local trails around a small town called Ivdel. But one night over cheap beers, our guide Alexei told us about Dyatlov Pass, a place north of where we were. He said it was where 9 hikers disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1959. Some were found half-dressed in the snow. Some had massive internal injuries without any external wounds. One girl's tongue was missing. He said it was haunted in a way that even the locals wouldn't talk about. Of course, being young and stupid, my buddy Derek thought it would be a great idea to take a small detour near Dyatlov Pass. Not on the pass. He said, just close enough to say we were there. Alexei didn't like the idea. He warned us it was still dangerous, especially in winter, but eventually he caved and said he'd take us close, but not through it. I still wish he'd just said no. The morning we left, it was clear but freezing, about 20°C Celsius. We layered up, packed a tent, emergency supplies, and left most of our heavier gear in town. It was supposed to be a short trip, camp one night, hike back. We reached a clearing near sunset. The mountains loomed darkly against the blood-red sky. There was a heavy silence, like even the wind was too scared to blow. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was this gnawing sense of unease. Alexei looked uncomfortable. No fire, he said. No noise. We camped quiet. We set up camp quickly and ate cold food from our packs. The temperature dropped hard after sunset. Derek and I joked around, trying to keep spirits up, but even he was noticeably quieter. By 11 p.m., we were inside our tent. Triple-layered sleeping bags, thermal clothes, still freezing. I woke up sometime later to a sound I couldn't immediately place. It was like a low humming, almost like someone humming a song under their breath, but deep and mechanical. I thought maybe it was the wind vibrating the tent poles. I pulled my beanie tighter over my ears and tried to go back to sleep. Then I heard footsteps, crunching in the snow, heavy, deliberate. At first, I figured it was Alexei checking the perimeter. But then I remembered. Alexei had his own tent about 50 feet away, and these steps, they were circling our tent. I nudged Derek. He was awake, eyes wide. I could tell he heard it too. We stayed perfectly still, listening. The steps would move around one side of the tent, then stop, long pauses, then slow, deliberate steps around the other side. Derek whispered, "Maybe it's an animal." "Too heavy," I mouthed back. The humming sound was louder now. It was outside, close, vibrating the very air around us. A low, unnatural resonance. I could feel it in my bones. We didn't dare unzip the tent. Alexei's words about being silent kept echoing in my head. The steps eventually stopped. But then something pressed against the side of the tent. A hand. I could see the imprint of long, bony fingers pushing into the fabric. It stayed there, unmoving. Derek was breathing so hard I thought for sure whoever, whatever, was out there would hear it. I didn't even blink. I just watched in horror as another hand appeared, then another, until the tent was surrounded by them, pressing and dragging across the nylon in slow, deliberate motions. After what felt like forever, they withdrew. The humming faded. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, we stumbled out into the snow, looking for any tracks. Nothing. No footprints around the tent. No signs of disturbance. Even Alexei swore he heard nothing. We packed up faster than I thought humanly possible. None of us spoke much on the hike back. Every so often, I'd think I heard that low humming again, faint and far away. Weeks later, back at school, I couldn't shake the feeling. I started researching more about the Dyatlov Pass incident. One of the more bizarre theories, the hikers heard a deep, low-frequency hum that drove them into panic, causing them to flee their tents into the freezing cold without proper gear. Some claimed it was infrasonic waves caused by the wind interacting with the mountains. Others said it was something else, something not of this earth. I don't know what we experienced out there. Maybe it was just the cold playing tricks on us. But sometimes, late at night, when everything's still, I swear I can hear that humming again. Closer. Every time. Three summers ago, I went on what was supposed to be a simple solo hiking trip through the Smoky Mountains. I'd hiked the area plenty of times before, but this time I decided to camp overnight off one of the lesser-known trails, a ridge trail that was barely maintained and barely traveled. It was peaceful at first, birds chirping, sunlight filtering through the heavy canopy. I made camp on a small, flat ledge overlooking a steep drop. It was the perfect spot, isolated, quiet, and beautiful. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, a strange fog rolled in faster than I'd ever seen before. One minute it was clear. The next, the entire trail behind me was swallowed in thick, cold mist. I figured it was just mountain weather and zipped up my tent early. As darkness fell, I read a bit by flashlight until I felt myself nodding off. That's when I heard it. A voice, calling my name. I sat up, heart hammering. It was faint but distinct, coming from somewhere beyond the fog outside. "Hey, come here." It was a woman's voice, soft, almost sing-song. I stayed silent, frozen. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me not to answer. Minutes passed. Then I heard it again, closer this time. "Come here, please." The voice was wrong. It wasn't urgent or scared. It was almost playful. I killed my flashlight and sat in the pitch black, trying not to make a sound. For hours, I sat there, listening. Occasionally, I'd hear soft footsteps crunching in the leaves, always just outside my tent. At one point, I swear I saw a faint shadow pass by, outlined only by the occasional flicker of moonlight. I never opened the tent, I just waited. When morning finally came, the fog had lifted and everything looked perfectly normal. No tracks, no signs of anything out of place. I packed up in record time and hiked out without looking back once. A few days later, I told a park ranger about it. He got real quiet and said, "That trail you camped on, a woman disappeared there 5 years ago. They never found her body." He said hikers sometimes reported strange things out there. Voices in the fog, missing time, feelings of being watched. He finished by saying, "Most folks know better than to camp overnight on the ridge. Now I do too." Last fall, I decided to take on a challenge I'd been dreaming about for years. A week-long solo hike across a remote stretch of the Cascades. I'd trained for months, planned my route down to the hour, and packed carefully emergency beacon, first aid kit, extra rations, even backup batteries. I felt ready. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for. Beautiful views, crisp autumn air, that freeing sense of being completely alone. The only sounds were birds, the rustling of leaves, and the crunch of my boots on the trail. On the third night, I camped beside a small creek deep in the forest. No signs of other hikers, not even distant campfire smoke, just endless trees and a sky full of stars. It was sometime past midnight when I woke up to a noise outside my tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, but the sound was rhythmic, deliberate. Footsteps, 2 feet. Slow, careful steps crunching through the underbrush. I lay there in absolute silence, listening. They circled my tent once, then again, never getting closer, never speaking. Eventually, the sounds faded into the trees. I barely slept after that. In the morning, there were no footprints around my tent. The ground was covered in damp pine needles. It should have shown tracks, but there was nothing. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it had been a bear after all, moving strangely. I forced myself to pack up and continue. But something felt wrong. As the day wore on, I kept catching glimpses of movement in the trees. Small, quick shadows just beyond my line of sight. Every time I stopped, the forest went still. But the feeling of being watched never left. By sunset, I'd reached a steep ravine that cut across the trail. The official path snaked down into the gully and back up the other side, but it was slow and treacherous. And that's when I saw it. A shortcut. A faint path through the trees to my right. It looked like it bypassed the worst of the descent. It wasn't on my map, but it was clearly there, worn into the earth by footsteps. Against my better judgment, I took it. The moment I stepped onto that path, the forest around me seemed to change. The trees grew denser, the air colder, the colors faded, everything was muted, grayish. I kept moving, telling myself it was just because the sun was setting. Shadows were playing tricks on me. But the path twisted and narrowed in unnatural ways. Trees leaned overhead like skeletal arms. The forest floor was littered with strange small bones, rabbits, birds, maybe squirrels, picked clean. And then, the eyes. I saw them first as tiny glints among the trees. Dozens of them, low to the ground, pale, hollow reflections that didn't belong to any animal I knew. I told myself it was just trick light, dewdrops, moonlight bouncing off wet leaves. Then the eyes started moving. Fast, jerky, surrounding me on all sides. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket and face as I sprinted blindly through the woods. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just needed to get out. My heart hammered in my chest so loud it drowned out everything else. At some point, I tripped and fell hard, slamming my knee against a rock. Pain exploded through me, but I scrambled up and kept moving. The eyes kept pace. Eventually, the trees thinned, and I stumbled into a wide clearing. I gasped for breath, spinning around. The forest edge was lined with figures. Tall, thin silhouettes with elongated limbs, their hollow eyes shining faintly in the dark. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching, waiting. I backed away slowly, one step at a time, until I found a narrow deer trail leading downhill. I didn't think. I just ran. I didn't stop until I reached the ravine. Again, the real trail somewhere upstream of where I'd left it. I camped right there on the open path, too terrified to venture into the trees again. That night, I kept my fire burning until dawn. The next morning, as I hobbled down the mountain on my injured leg, I passed another group of hikers coming up. They smiled and waved casually. I almost asked them if they'd ever heard about the shortcut, but something told me not to. When I finally made it back to town, I went to the local ranger station. I told them about the strange path. The ranger, a grizzled guy who'd clearly been working the mountains for decades, went quiet when I described it. "You didn't take it, did you?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead. "That trail's not real. Every few years someone sees it, thinks it's a shortcut, but it doesn't go anywhere. Not anywhere you want to end up, anyway." He wouldn't say more. He just told me I was lucky to have gotten back. Lucky. Even now, months later, sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I think about that clearing. Those hollow eyes. I wonder if they're still out there, just waiting for the next hiker who decides to take the easy way out. Maybe next time, the forest won't let them go. Some places leave a scar on the earth so deep that it lingers forever. Maybe it's tragedy. Maybe it's the sheer weight of fear. Maybe it's something we aren't meant to understand. Whether it's the icy isolation of the Ural Mountains, the haunted halls of a cursed hotel, or a blood-stained home where innocence was stolen, the result is always the same. Echoes. Echoes of footsteps where there should be none. Echoes of laughter, whispers, shadows, warnings maybe, or invitations. And if you're ever lucky or unlucky enough to find yourself in one of these places, listen closely. Sometimes it's not just the past that lingers. Sometimes it's still waiting for you.